Good morning. This is Danae. It's been a minute, I know. I kind of dropped off the face of the podcast earth for a while, but I am still here. And happy ending of summer. Kids are back in school. It's been a wild, wild summer. Lots of interesting things happened in our little world. One of the least fun was getting COVID. So, man, in spite of all my best efforts, Doug and I both got it. But we are here. We are back and healthy. And I wanted to come on and kind of make an announcement of some things that are changing. Lots, I said, has changed this summer in the past 2 years, in case you haven't noticed that. But I just wanted to go ahead and say, I'm changing direction with the Unfolding Enneagram. Actually, I'm really more refining it than changing it, because nothing has changed about the fact that I love exploring. I love learning and understanding the Enneagram itself. But what has changed is how I understand its purpose at this time in my life. And that's why I finally feel like I know my place in the vast Enneagram landscape. If you've been with me for any length of time, you know I've kind of jumped all over the board. But that's how it is. There's so much out there. And I will say, as a type 7, I wanted to be a part of it all. But I finally feel like I have my footing now. So to kind of explain or illustrate how I feel about my place in the Enneagram world and in the transformation world in general, let me give you an analogy and see if this resonates with you at all. And then you'll know where I'm going. So imagine that you're hanging a picture. Just going to put a picture up on the wall. And immediately, I know I could do an entire podcast just on that subject by itself. Like, how does each Enneagram type approach hanging a picture? Because I know for a fact, if you're working with a type 1 and they're thinking, well, duh, you have to start with a tape measure. And then the 7s, they kind of chime in and go, we'll just eyeball it. And at which point the 2s will come along and say, let me help you. And the 6s might be thinking, this isn't going to end well if you don't have a plan, etc. I could go through each one, and that's kind of funny. But I got to thinking about that. And my dad, who was a mechanical engineer and also a type 8, knew that you had to measure things. Things had to add up, right? And so if you're old enough to remember what a slide rule was, my dad, he would, quote, air quotes, look, help me with my math projects. But he would bring out a slide rule. Well, a slide rule was a way to calculate measurements before there were computers. And there were also tools called levels. So when my dad would, begin to build well, he didn't really build a lot, but he would use a level. And what I want to focus on is that little bubble that sits in the middle of a level. You know what I'm talking about? It's that liquid in the middle, or the level has liquid in the middle, and right in the middle of the liquid is that little bubble that shifts to the left or the right if you don't have it perfectly balanced. And I can tell you there are many types, even us type 7s would look at something that's off balance and go, that might be a little crooked. But some people, it just absolutely, it's like they're compelled to go fix it. So what I want to say is, have you ever felt like you were the bubble? And what does that mean? Well, if you are at a certain point in life, you might be feeling like I'm in the middle. I'm not the young mother with the kids anymore, and I'm not so old that I don't have a life going on that's not totally focused on the kids or the grandkids. You have your own spot in life. But when you're in that bubble, or you are feeling like you're the bubble, you can feel when things are off balance. So you want to know where your place is, and you're focused on maybe your parents and your children and the grandchildren. And when things get out of balance, like when you feel pulled to focus more in one direction, or you feel focused to move towards the other direction, your kids, your parents, then the bubble shifts and you can begin to feel off balance. If your focus has been outside of what your place is in the world. So that's what I'm saying. I feel like my place at this point in my life is with women who are entering that beautiful, but often feared part of life, the second part of life. And we've been programmed, of course, through advertising or whatever, to think it's going to be awful. And so they come up with the midlife crisis term. And as we enter that, or maybe you've already entered it and come through it, you're like, oh my gosh, here it is. I got to prepare for this crisis. And so if you are prone to prepare for crisis, then you begin making a plan ahead of time. But honestly, you can't know until you are in it. Oh, this is it, right? Or you may have come through it and look back and be able to say, you know what? It really wasn't as much as a crisis. I learned a lot through it. Well, that's what I want this community to be, the unfolding community. I want it to be women supporting women. Either you're entering this part of life or you've come through it, and we need to connect to people who have been on that path. I can tell you absolutely, it's what you decide it's going to be. And it doesn't happen overnight. You may not even realize you're in it. Sometimes it just sneaks up on you and you're like, wait, I feel different. Not just physically, because yes, you're going to feel different physically, but there's a restlessness and it begins stirring in your heart and soul. And things that seemed so critical at one time, they just really aren't that critical anymore. So instead of the midlife crisis, I love the phrase, a midlife awakening. And I didn't coin that phrase, but I love it. I read a quote in Psychology Today from a woman who was in the second part of life. She was actually way into it. But she said, I have realized we live our lives by so many rules that no longer or never had value. I think I began questioning them in my 40s, but didn't know until now that I didn't need answers. I just needed to let the rules go. I love that, right? We get so focused on what we think are the rules, what we think has to be a way that we navigate this part of life. Psychologist Marsha Reynolds says, when women ask me about the restlessness they're feeling in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, I tell them to reframe their shift as a midlife awakening because their beliefs about their place in the world and what they want to achieve is expanding instead of completely changing. So that resonates, right? For myself and many who are probably listening to this podcast, we have spent years being open to expanding our boundaries of how we understand life. And my goodness, the complexities thereof, right? But what I understand about the Enneagram has changed dramatically over the years. So I have not at all lost my love of learning more and more about this beautiful tool called the Enneagram. But again, what I understand about it has changed so much. Why? Because my life has changed dramatically. And that's what life is, right? It's dynamic. It's ever-changing. That's what the nature of nature is. It's constantly changing. We see it in nature. We see the change of seasons. And if you've listened to me for any length of time, I use the metaphor of the butterfly because it's one of the most unbelievably revealing metaphors about life that I've ever seen. There's so much more to the metamorphosis process than I ever learned in science that I've ever heard anywhere. I've been studying so much biology for the past few years, and specifically the butterfly, that I came across things that I've never even heard. And it'll blow your mind. I promise you, if you go on this journey with me, even if you just want to learn the science, which I hope you don't, you're going to just look at this and go, how amazing is creation? How amazing is nature? And how can we begin to look at the nature of nature, and specifically for this journey, through the metamorphosis process? And I can tell you, I have heard a lot about going through the cocoon phase. We're cocooning. And people use that to say, well, I'm taking a little break. I'm taking some time to myself. I'm going to get all cozy with a blanket and maybe, go off into an Airbnb and just spend some time to myself and just, kind of cocoon. But I promise you what happens inside the cocoon, or the chrysalis, which is where the butterfly goes during metamorphosis, it is not a little comfy snuggle up with a blanket and some hot cocoa time of life. No, 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 no. This is where the change happens. And what happens in there? Oh, I am not going to give away the end of this, but it is, it's so beautiful. So I want to invite those of you, women, and please, no offense to the men out there, but we have to have communities where we can connect with each other. I love the men in my life. My goodness, do I love my husband? Do I love my sons, my brothers, my nephews, all of them? But we can really learn so much from each other, being in community with someone who understands our specific place in life. That's why there's so many, mother podcasts for young mothers, and books and Facebook and Instagram groups, because we want to learn as a young mother as we're going through these things. Does anybody else relate? I mean, I'm not having the best time with my toddler today. Does that make me bad? Well, of course not. But you connect with other women, other mothers who can help you. And so what happens when we're going through these changes? It's usually something shocks our routines, because most of the time we're just kind of going on autopilot. And if I asked you right now, have you gone through any major shock waves recently? Well, everybody would raise their hand. I'm raising both of my hands, because after 2 years of just the pandemic and all of the being off balance, good grief, levels that just kind of crashed and the liquid went all over the place. Nobody knew where to find balance for a while. So, but even though everybody raised their hands, if you're out there literally raising your hand, it doesn't mean we all experience the same shock. So, sure, there are many that we have in common, but even so, we experience them individually, right? So even when we have difficult experiences in life, in our community, in our families or relationships, we experience it personally on an individual level. So Carl Jung says, the first half of life is devoted to forming a healthy ego, and the second half is going inward and letting go of it. Well, for those of us who've lived long enough to form our story, our ego story as it is, the question is, as we transition to these new phases of life, why do we have to let it go if we've worked so hard to create it? What's its purpose? And how can I let it go if I'm not even sure what it is? Well, when we go through this workshop that I'm about to tell you about, that's the first place we start, is how did I even come up with this story of who I am? And we're going to look at the life of the butterfly as it starts out as a caterpillar all it does, if you've read The Hungry, Hungry Caterpillar, which leaves out a lot of detail, but children need to learn as they develop. There's appropriate places and times to learn the whole story. But the caterpillar, all it does is consume. It eats and eats and eats and eats and eats. It consumes, consumes, consumes. That's it. That's its entire mission while it's a caterpillar. Well, as we grow, we come into this world. Actually, we come in pre-programmed with a lot of data that we can talk about. But beyond that, the moment we come into this world, we begin being bombarded with data. And there's a whole list of information that begins influencing our story. How did this story of us? How do we tell the story of who we are? Well, we have to look back and go, oh, well, this is the setting I was born into, my gender, my race, my nationality, my sphere of influence, and the list goes on and on. But we're going to look at those as we go along because it's amazing how many ways our minds consume this data that forms this story that we've worked so hard to develop. We learn our defense mechanisms, we learn our strengths, our motivations, our fears, and then we go along on autopilot mostly because we need these in the developmental stage. We need a defense mechanism. We need to know, how do I navigate in life? How do I feel loved? How do I feel safe? What are the ways that I developed this story of me, this ego story? Until you even know where it came from, what it is, well, how could you begin letting it go? So last February, I launched a 10-week Enneagram and Transformation program with a wonderful group of people who, bless their hearts, they were so gracious to go through this course with me, and because I wanted their feedback at the end of the 10 weeks. And so they knew, okay, I got to be honest and tell her what worked, what didn't work. It was a lot of material. It was a lot because we went through 10 weeks. And so when I got the feedback from them, I had to put that ego aside and listen to them. And in doing so, what a gift that group was for me, because I was able to see, even though a lot of what I was teaching and we were talking about, I thought was really good information, it was too much for what I wanted to accomplish. So the 10-week program is now a 6-week program, and it's clear, it's concise, and it gets to the heart of what I hope to convey and connect with this course. It's called The Unfolding Midlife Metamorphosis, a Revolution of Spirit. Isn't that beautiful? Aren't we all just ready for a revolution? So it's still a 3-course module. It's just 6 weeks now. And the approach is identify, release, and unfold. Until we identify where we are in our story, until we understand our place in that level, if you're in the bubble, if you are the bubble, we can't begin to let go, because we have to identify what are the pain points as they are. Why do I feel this restlessness? What is inside of me screaming to be released and reframed and restructured? So when we go through this, we're going to start by identifying things like those of us who have been in midlife. Maybe you're just entering it. Maybe you're stuck in that. I still don't know how to get my footing. We're going to have questions like, what do I feel I should have done by this time in my life? Oh my goodness, when I read that question, what a heavy question. Is it true? Should I have done it? Or is some outside influence or force, the social media that looks like, oh my goodness, I should have done this already. I should have. Well, really? Is that true? So we need to ask ourselves these questions. Is there something I should have? Or do I really not even care about that right now? Can I relook at what I think I should have done in this time in my life? Is there something more fulfilling that I want to focus on now? What do I want more of in my life? And a bigger question, what do I want less of in my life? And what I think is such an important question, and where the Enneagram is such a beautiful tool for helping look at this question. The question is, what have I imprisoned that is crying to be free? That is the metamorphosis question. And until we can identify what's keeping us imprisoned, then we won't know how to let it free, how to ever come out of that chrysalis as the beautiful transformed butterfly. And a little secret, what was inside the caterpillar, actually the egg, what was inside all along that was just waiting to be revealed? Oh, you're going to love this. So I'm asking if this is something that sounds like I want to know more about that. You can either shoot me an email at info@theunfoldingenneagram.com, or you can go to the website, which I hope you do, theunfoldingenneagram.com. Click on the middle tab that says the Unfolding Workshop. And if you haven't signed up for the newsletter, please do so, because that's where I'm going to begin giving you some journal prompts to consider before we even start this course. Now, it starts September 14th, 2022. And I know that's just in a few weeks, but that gives you some time to go look at the course module, to, if you haven't read much on my website, you can go see where have I been in this journey, and why do I feel like I am qualified to be a guide for you on this workshop journey. Again, I just am so grateful for the women, for the guides, for the mentors who have led me to this place. Oh my goodness, if it hadn't been for those that have been on this journey before, and I could name so many people not part of the Enneagram, people who have been Enneagram coaches and teachers, my mom, my grandma, my aunts, my vast connection through the spiritual world, and just those of you who have been on this journey, have reached out to me, have sent me wonderful messages of encouragement. I thank you all. And I just hope if you are in any bit curious about what this is about, just check it out. I've made it incredibly, incredibly affordable, because the truth is I've given so much because I have been given so much. But there are some ways that help me keep this going through the podcast and through the website. And so I'm just asking for $100 for the course, or you can pay $20 a week. And if that's not in your budget, just let me know, because I don't want anyone to be denied having access to this beautiful program. Thank you. I look forward to hearing from you. And if you have any questions, again, just shoot me an email. Love you all. Have a great, great rest of